everyone, and welcome to this afternoon's NIDA in Conversation. My name's David Berthold. I'm the Director in Residence here at NIDA. And today we're meeting on the lands of the Gadigal and the Bidjigal people, two of the 29 language clans that make up the Iroquois Nation. And this has been a place of culture and storytelling for about 3,000 generations now. And I'd like to acknowledge elders, past, present, and emerging, and in particular say welcome to any First Nations people in the audience from these lands and waters, or indeed from anywhere in the world. This is the first of our NIDA in Conversation series this year, and it's a very special one. The rest of the year will be curated by 6 amazing artists, and they are Tasnim Hussain, Beck Cole, Imara Savage, Anjali Felicia King, Bridie McKim, and Darren Yap. So we're looking forward to their curation of the NIDA in Conversation series for the rest of the year. We're kicking off with a very special guest. This special guest is a 4-time Tony Award winner for the musicals Rent, Avenue Q, In the Heights, and Hamilton. And Hamilton in particular will open this Saturday here in Sydney's Lyric Theatre, and has taken over $1 billion in revenue around the world. But perhaps more importantly than that, it's actually changed the lives of millions of people, changed the face of Broadway and of the American musical theatre. And it's probably not too far a stretch to say that it's changed the way many people think about American democracy. We're going to talk about some of those things here today. So please welcome our very special guest, Mr. Jeffrey Seller.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good to see you when you do it. Right,
I'm going to pour the water.
like a good guest.
Yes.
Thank you.
And can I just say, I was so happy that, I got out of quarantine and it started raining. And it has been raining for me out of quarantine for the last 12 days. So I was so happy this morning when I woke up and I saw the sun. Thank you, Sydney, for the sun.
First day of sun. I saw the show last night and had a fantastic time, I've got to say. And one of the things that struck me, and I'm going to ask you a really simple question to start with, and I know it'll interest this group. What does a theatrical producer actually do?
Picks the play. And therein lies my values, my aesthetic, and my opportunity to ask myself, what kinds of stories do I want to be associated with? What kinds of stories do I want to help put out into the world? And what play I decide to produce will become my biggest artistic expression in that endeavor. And then, of course, there's nurturing, cheerleading, criticizing authors, directors, designers, put together those authors, directors, and designers whose chemistry in the room together, we hope, will create something in which the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And a producer who's doing an effective job will bring people together who will make something that none of them could have made all by themselves. And then, of course, the other thing we must do is sell. And it's probably, maybe it's predictable that my last name is Seller. But we have to, as producers, sell, sell, sell. Sometimes I'm selling an author on writing the show to begin with. We're selling a landlord to book our show into their theater instead of somebody else's show. We're selling actors to be in the show, or we're selling group sales agents to buy blocks of tickets to the show, or we're selling a not-for-profit theater company to partner with us to start the show. And then, of course, we're ultimately selling the tickets to all the individual buyers. And you know what happens when we stop selling? Show closes. And that's the end.
I actually want to go back and just start off a little more personally too, about how that ethic really of your theatrical producing and how that might have begun. You grew up in Detroit.
Yes.
And not particularly well-off family. You know, it was a family that struggled.
Yes.
Can you share with us what your first memories of theatre were?
Sure. I'm going to give you two. One is that I went to a summer day camp. We couldn't afford overnight camp. And it was called Camp Kilikawa, which is like, just forget that because it's so politically incorrect as to be unspeakable. It was, obviously referring to Native American things at my local community center. And the camp consisted of, doing all kinds of play outside and going to the pool every day. But then that first summer, the high school kids were doing a play in the little theater at the high school, and it was called Rump. And what it was a rock musical of Rumpelstiltskin. Right. And I can still remember everybody singing, everybody do the rump, rump, rump. And I think I was in between 3rd and 4th grade. And I still remember that production of Rump. And then I'm Jewish. I went to Sunday school, which is, a lot like Christian Sunday school. And we don't have an nativity play at Christmas. We have a Purim play at Purim. Purim's a holiday in March that celebrates the heroism of Queen Esther, who was a Jew who saved all of her fellow Jews from the evil tyrannical Haman who wanted to extinguish them. And she was Jewish, but she was married to this non-Jewish king Ahasuerus, and she persuades Ahasuerus to save her people. And the Jews do a play about Queen Esther every year. And at my temple, they used to juxtapose the Old Testament story of Queen Esther against a Broadway musical. And when I was in the 4th grade, for reasons that I'm not even quite sure of, I said to my dad, can I go to the audition? It's like on Sunday at 2 o'clock at the temple. And he said, get in the car. And I went to this audition, and of course I didn't even know how to read lines yet, you know what I mean? I was reading it as if it was out of a textbook. And I was cast as a sailor in the chorus, and I'm watching Queen Esther sing about King Ahasuerus. I'm going to wash that man right out of my hair. And it's my guess that someone high up, maybe a rabbi, decided that it would be too risque for 4th grade boys to sing There's Nothing Like a Dame. So we sang, We Sail the Ocean Blue in Our Saucy Ships of Beauty from HMS Pinafore. So therein lies my first play, Rodgers and Hammerstein, and Gilbert and Sullivan, not to mention the Old Testament, which we all know is a very good source of musicals.
Did you write a play around that time?
So then, I loved it so much. You get to do one performance on Purim. And I went away, and I started thinking, and I sat down in 4th grade, in my 4th grade class. Mrs. York was my teacher. Do you know what's also sweet? My sister now is a caretaker for Mrs. York, who's 94 years old and still living, and my sister is her caretaker. Anyway, Mrs. York, my 4th grade teacher, wasn't paying close attention to me, and I started writing a play in my math class.
Wouldn't you?
And it was called Invention. And my idea was this. I used to play in my backyard with my 2 best friends, Bruce and Jay. And Bruce was slightly of the destructive sort. And we used to go up on top of my woodshed. There was a woodshed in the back of the backyard. And it had a roof with some shingles. And he used to rip the shingles off the roof and whip them like frisbees into the neighbors' backyards. So as summer progressed, those shingles were becoming more and more degraded. And I, in my imagination, said, well, what would happen if we went on the roof one day and he ripped off so many shingles we fell? And we didn't fall onto the concrete slab of the shed. We fell through air, time, space,
into this magical land called Adventureland, whereupon we are met with many life-threatening obstacles and adventures.
Wow.
And that was my 4th grade play that we then did in the 5th grade.
Originality.
I love that.
I like it, yeah.
And by the way, so I was in it, I directed it, and I produced it.
I think Adventureland is the name of your company too, isn't it?
Yeah, so when I formed my new company, which is now about 8 years ago, and I had to ask what's it called, there was only one place to go, and that's back to that shed.
Yeah, it's like putting metal to you. Yeah.
Yeah, I still have the play. I'm selling it after this. 99.
Sell.
Get a lot.
You mentioned kind of writing, directing, and producing. So still at high school, so you were a producer then.
So, you know what's interesting? Like all of, well, I won't say all, because there may be some great lighting designers here and set designers and stuff, but like many, including many playwrights, I started out being an actor in plays. And I joined community theater in 7th grade, and I was in their youth theater group. And I remember, I'm in the 8th grade, I try out for the play, I get a part in this play called The Adventures of Popcorn Pete. And I thought, that is the stupidest title I ever heard. And I play the Jack-in-the-Box, and it's a fun part, and I get to do, I get an introduction to Tchaikovsky, because there's like this dance that I have to do to the Russian dance in the Nutcracker. And not many people come see the play, and I don't think it's a very good play. And I said after that show, who gets to pick the play? And they said the play reading. I would ask myself, one, what would be good for all of my fellow thespians to do? What would give us pleasure as actors to do as a play? And two, what would help the audience get excited about it so they want to come see it? How can we serve the artistry? And then how can we serve the audience? And that was innate. And then shortly after that, I was a pretty good writer, so I would write the press releases for the local newspapers. And then I would go to the local businesses to solicit advertising for our program. And, give me your business card, we'll put in the program, and then for 20 bucks. So before I hit puberty, I was picking the play, I was marketing the play, and I was helping raise money for the play.
So it was in your bones, and in your heart. Yeah. So let's skip ahead a while till after puberty. Oh, we'll run out of time. Yeah. So you went to University of Michigan, and then after graduating from the University of Michigan, went to New York City pretty much as soon as you could.
Yeah, right, like 2 months later.
Yeah, pretty soon. Yeah, doing some community theatre and so on.
Yeah.
And then you were asked to go and see a little solo rock show. Can you tell me about that? What led you to that experience?
I'm 25 years old. I'm working now as a booking agent, which is a job in the US that books the national tours of musicals. Now, here in Australia, you have about 4 cities you can go to. In the US, we have about 80 cities we can go to. So it's a big job. And I've been doing it for 3 years. I'm booking musicals. So I'm in the business, I'm making a living in the business, but I am not happy in the business. I want to be a producer. And I've just broken up from my boyfriend of 6 years, and I feel lost. I'm like having a 25-year-old midlife crisis, which, if you're not there, you'll be there soon. And if you've already done it, congratulations. And if you're doing it again at 55, hello. Anyway, I hate my job. I lost my boyfriend. I haven't realized any of my goals. And my friend says, you want to go see this rock monologue that's tonight over at Second Stage? It's called Bobo Days. And I'm like, whoa, rock monologue? What's a rock monologue? Like, I'd never seen the word rock and the word monologue put in the same line together. And I said, yeah, let's go. So we get up to this small performance space. It's less, it's this many seats. It's 100 seats. And there's piano, bass, drums, no set, blackouts. And then the band takes the stage, and then out comes, I'm not going to tell this without crying. And then out comes this tall, lanky guy who has big ears and really curly hair, and he attacks the piano. And he starts performing a song cycle of his 30th birthday. And what's happening to him is that he hears the time going off in his head, and it's going tick, 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 boom, because he thinks he's going to explode. Because he's 30 years old, and he writes rock musicals that nobody wants to produce. He has an agent, she won't return his calls. He has a girlfriend, he knows she's not the right person for him, but he's afraid to break up because he's afraid to be lonely. His roommate is telling him, I have a job for you to go become an advertising copywriter, and you can finally make a living, quit your job at the diner, and maybe you don't have to live in that shitty apartment that has a bathtub and a kitchen. And he's asking, should I hang on to my dreams, or should I go sell out and take this job? And of course, that's Jonathan Larson. And I'm bawling, because I don't understand how this man who I've never seen in my life is telling my life story. And after the performance, I'm a little shy to meet him, as I recall, and I think I may have seen him in a party, but I don't think I went over and I didn't know how you schmooze him in a party. But I'm good at writing letters, because I wrote all those press releases for my theater group, and I wrote him a letter the next day saying, I want to produce your musicals. And that was in the year 1990, when I was 25 and he was 30. And in 1996, we premiered Rent at New York Theatre Workshop in Broadway.
Yeah. And that was a hugely transforming moment, not only for your life, but also, for the American musical, because Broadway at that time, in the late 80s and early 90s, was pretty much full of the English musicals. Miss Saigon and Phantom, Les Mis, Cats.
Yes.
That was pretty much it, really,
yes.
on Broadway. So, but this was new music, new stories, a gay couple, lesbian couple, homeless, drug addiction, dealing with HIV/AIDS. I mean, that was a different story, different music.
When I was having the many, many conversations that I had with Jonathan between 1990 and 1996, he used to say, as he was developing Rent and we were trying to get Boho Days on, which I recommended that he change the title to Tick Tick Boom, which he did. And just as another small and interesting point, Lin-Manuel Miranda has now made a movie of Tick Tick Boom that's going to come out on Netflix later this year. Yeah, wow, right? Everything comes back around. And so Jonathan used to say about all those shows that you just said, David, those aren't our characters, those aren't our stories, and that's not our music. Who'd want to go see that if you were our age? And he said, I'm going to change all that. I'm going to make the hair of the 90s. And I also want to point out that though he absolutely wanted to do that, and he did, his two favorite musicals were West Side Story and Fiddler on the Roof. So he knew how to use the bones, the structure of our history, in order to reinvent it for a new time. And of course, the glory and the tragedy is that Jonathan did exactly what he set out to do. He changed the face of the American musical. And for those of you that don't know the story, he also tragically died 3 hours following dress rehearsal of an aortic aneurysm. He never saw it.
Do you miss him?
Oh, I miss him. I miss him right now as we're telling this story, as I talk about Lynn making Tick Tick Boom. And, as I think of the cruelty of life, to live your whole life wanting to achieve something and then dying on the eve of its first performance. Life is cruel.
You all did something very special with that show, and you've expressed some of them. But also you're very keen, because it was your story and your music, but not many people could afford to see Broadway shows at that time.
Including me.
Including you. So you wanted your generation
we did Rent when I was 31 years old. And by that point, by the way, I had left that job I didn't like, and I had a new booking agency, but at least now I was the co-owner with my partner, Kevin McCullum, my business partner, Kevin McCullum. And so we're working on Rent. And by the way, we thought Rent, in its best incarnation, would be a show that would play in a small theater, like a theater this size. You know what I mean? Off Broadway. Maybe 300 seats, maybe a garage type fun setting, something like that. That's what Jonathan and I talked about. And when it occurred to Kevin and I, seeing it on stage at New York Theater Workshop, this is a Broadway show. It has the breadth, it has the themes, it has the big emotions and the big ideas that could carry a Broadway musical. We also said to ourselves, I said to myself, if this can't be on Broadway, then I can't have a career on Broadway, because this is who I am. And I'm over those other shows. They're just not interesting to me. And so we're now getting ready to go to Broadway, and we know we need to find a new way to make it economically accessible. And I want to say, there already was a rush ticket policy for some Broadway shows. I actually remember Miss Saigon had a student rush. If you were a student, you bring your ID day of, and then you get a $5 or $10, $15 or $20 ticket, and you sit in the last 2 rows of the balcony, all the way up in the nosebleed section. And so we thought, well, we have to have some sort of a policy. So we decided, number one is, I want to have a $20 ticket, but it shouldn't be just for students. Because as we all know, so we're done being a student at age 22, 3, 4, and we still don't have any money when we're 26, 7, and 8. I barely have enough money at that point to go see a Broadway show on any regular basis. So we're going to do $20, anybody. First come, first serve, show up at 6 o'clock the day of the show. And then we got the cheeky idea that instead of putting them in the last 2 rows of the balcony, why don't we put them in the first 2 rows of the orchestra, and they'll create the wave that then goes all the way back to the back 2 rows of the balcony. And it started not as a lottery, but literally as first come, first serve. And that became such a crazy thing that within a year of Rent being open and being this cultural phenomenon, by Friday night, we would have 3 lines going simultaneously. 2 of those lines were people sleeping over in tents. So now we have a tent city about the show. It has a tent city. And so, you'd have 1 line for Friday night going one way, another line for the Saturday matinee going another way, and another line for Saturday night. And we thought, someone's gonna get killed, and we've got to stop this. It was still on 44th Street, which was pretty derelict at that moment in history. And that's when we converted the first come, first serve to a lottery. So anybody, you don't have to now come 24 hours in advance and bring your tent. You could just show up, enter the lottery, and have a fair chance like anybody else.
Yeah, a policy which you continued for Hamilton, of course.
And that policy now, the Metropolitan Opera uses it.
Yeah. Let's skip ahead a little bit more.
Yeah.
So you found yourself in the basement of the drama bookshop.
Yes.
What did you find there?
So I want to give credit to my then partner Kevin, because in fact, one night, Avenue Q is about to start preaching on Broadway, and Kevin calls me and says, Nevin Steinberg, our sound designer, who's right here right now, putting together Hamilton, tell me I gotta come see this show in the drama bookshop. He said, Jeffrey, get over here. I said, I can't, I'm going to see some other show, and by the way, I think I have bronchitis, I feel awful. I don't go that night. Kevin discovers this band of theater guys led by Lin-Manuel Miranda and Tommy Kail. Tommy's the director, Lin is the author, and they've concocted this little show called In the Heights. It takes place in Washington Heights, which is on the northern western tip of Manhattan. And this was a show that Lin started writing as a sophomore at Wesleyan College in Connecticut. And when he was a sophomore, he wrote it as a one-act, and he directed it himself. He was not in it. And when he met up with Tommy, when they both had gotten to New York after college, Tommy had persuaded the drama bookshop to give them the basement to do their own shows. And Tommy said, why don't we work on this In the Heights and see if we can make it into a full show? And so Tommy started giving him some assignments, and they made it into a reading, and then Kevin said, we gotta do the show. And then that began, so this is 2003, and then Kevin and I go and develop with them In the Heights. We bring on Kiera Hodes, a fantastic young female playwright, to write the book. And we develop In the Heights over the next 4 years. We open it at a theater that Kevin and I built off Broadway in '07. And then we transfer it to Broadway 1 year later in '08. And one of the things that makes In the Heights so beautiful is that Lin is writing about his community. He's writing about the Cubano, Puerto Rican, Dominican folks who live up in Washington Heights and who have their own beautiful sounds, traditions, and ways of life. And Lin said, I wrote that show after I went to the Nederlander Theater with my girlfriend in high school and saw Rent and saw a contemporary show that told me, oh, I can write about my community. And that was In the Heights.
Fantastic. You Lin bought the drama bookshop recently.
Yes. So then the drama, well, you know, if Lin and Tommy say, Jeffrey, can we do something? My job is like my father, get in the car. So I can't keep track of time because all of us just lost. I mean, you guys have been great. This Sydney place is the best place on earth right now. But we lost a year of our lives. Anyway, so I can't keep track of time, but about 2 years ago, the drama bookshop, which was owned by like this 85-year-old lady who inherited it from her husband, she was like, I'm done, the landlord's kicking me out, I can't afford it anymore, and so there was an article saying we're gonna close at the end of the month. And Tommy calls me and says, can we buy it? And I was like, oh God, yes. And so we go and so Tommy and Lynn and I went and bought the drama bookshop, and we still had to move, and then we started a construction project, and then it was delayed, and then there was COVID, but I'm happy to say we have finished the construction. It's ready to open, and with luck, we will open it in our spring, you know, somewhere in June of this year on West 39th Street in New York City.
Yeah, a wonderful thing to do was Lin tells the story of, you know, couldn't afford to buy the plays and sat there on the floor of the drama bookshop reading.
Yeah, I mean, it's for Lin and Tommy, it's like, wow, we're coming home again, and then we're doing a good deed to make sure that all the young artisans, like all of you folks, still have a drama bookshop to go to as a resource, as a community center, as a place to just stand there and pick up a Clifford Odets or, you know, a Susan Laurie Parks and read a play.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about Hamilton now, and there's lots of stuff to talk about, but, you know, you're talking about, you know, the accessibility of audiences, you know, the lottery schemes, and even the story of buying the drama bookshop. You know, very concerned about, or interested in, you know, giving opportunities to many people. I want you to tell us a little bit about EduHam.
Oh, with pleasure.
Yeah.
You know, similar conversations as Kevin and I had with Brent. We have to make this accessible. And Tommy and Lynn and I had multiple conversations in the period between opening off Broadway in February of 15 and then going to Broadway in the summer, that we were going to have to make sure this was accessible to young people who would not usually be able to go see a Broadway show. So that particularly meant young people of color, young people of the New York City School District. And what I proposed is that we would create a Hamilton Education Day on a regular basis for a Wednesday matinee where we would sell the whole house out to young people, and then we would create an education program that would go along with it so that before the show even happens, the kids come to the theater, they have workshops with the cast, they can perform their own material for the entire audience based on the themes, the characters, the history of Hamilton. They can use violins, hip hop, dance, speech, whatever form they want to tell their own stories. And this was an adaptation of something I had already done at Rent, but on a much smaller level. So what we did is we created a partnership with the New York City school system and with the Rockefeller Foundation, which helped to finance it because it's costly. And we started a program where we have had as participants and guests 250,000 teenagers all across America coming to see Hamilton for either $10 or nothing and doing a full education program in their classrooms. And these are all kids from Title I schools. A Title I school in the US is the definition of a school in which more than 50% of the kids get a free lunch. And our greatest performances, our greatest afternoons are always on Wednesdays when we have EduHam performance, whether that's on Broadway, or it's in Detroit, or it's in Los Angeles, or Chicago.
Yeah. The experience, not just the show itself, but all of its themes.
Yeah, the kids
of
work
American democracy.
Yes, they work on a unit for months, because what we do is we dovetail it with our education system, where usually a sophomore or a junior is doing their one-year study on American history. Yeah. So we dovetail it to the course on the American Revolution.
Yeah. Let's talk about politics a little bit. I've always thought it, but seeing the show last night, it really struck me freshly how much of an Obama-era musical it is. And being in a room where it happens, and even things like not throwing away your best shot, and you can hear the importance of an African American president.
Yes.
Very much in the musical, and of course it opened during the period of Obama. Can you tell me about on the night that Trump was elected, and Hamilton, of course, was still playing on Broadway. That was on the Tuesday evening when that became apparent. And the next day, you had two shows next day on the Wednesday, a Wednesday matinee and a Wednesday evening. What was that day like?
Excruciating. We're going to be able to tell this story because we know it has a happier ending, which is that we threw that motherfucker out of office last November.
You know where I stand.
Sorry for the language. I'm going to start personally and keep going. I was ashamed when the next morning my then 9-year-old son, or no, he wasn't 9, he was 12-year-old son said, "Did he win?" And I had to say yes. And I knew that that was going to represent a very dark era for our nation. I called a meeting before the matinee just to find out if we could go on, because the pain was so deep. We got together, the cast and I, crew members, and I opened the floor up. A Mexican-American actress in the show said, "I'm suddenly afraid for my safety." A Puerto Rican actor in the show said, "Well, now we know." At least it's there, it's blatant. Now we know what we're up against. Other actors cried. Other actors were rebellious. And what we learned that day is that now Hamilton was even more important than it was the day before for telling a story that represents our best impulses and our best values as Americans. And for those of you that know a little bit about the show, that's not to say the show does not embrace conflict, pettiness, selfishness, greed, all of those things. But we still see that it is a creation story in which we build something great through our conflict, through adversarial relationships, through not liking each other sometimes, through disagreement. And then, so we made it through those two shows. And then 9 days later, I got a phone call that this man who was elected, elected vice president, Mike Pence, wanted to come see the show on that Friday night. And I thought, what do I do now? How do we be polite? How do we host? What is our responsibility to ourselves and to each other? And when I found out he was coming, I didn't say he can't come, because that would have been rude. And I used a real threadbare argument as to why I thought we could use this to address him directly and point him out, which is that he called, his staff called the landlord to say, can I get a house seat the day of? Only a special person gets that. We could have said, go to the box office. It's sold out. But because he wanted special treatment, we thought we could give him special treatment. And that's when I started composing this note that Brandon Victor Dixon, our fantastic actor who was playing Aaron Burr, read from the stage at the end of that performance that night. And then, just to summarize, it said, Mr. Vice President-elect, please hear us out. We are the diverse Americans who we appeal to you to see and to represent and to ensure our inalienable rights, because we are fearful. And that statement from and I want to say, the Vice President-elect Pence was gentlemanly in how he received it. And he said after, it was a reasonable statement to make, and I applaud them. The man he was working for started a Twitter storm, and it sent that story ricocheting around the world. And that had consequences. We had threats. We had to quadruple our security. We had an incident on our Chicago stage that night when a rowdy, drunk member started shouting and screaming at the cast from the second balcony, and they became fearful for their lives. And we are very proud that might be called the first moment of resistance. To say, this is not normal, and we are going to resist with everything in our power.
Jeffrey, I'm going to ask you one final question, and then after that, I'll open it to the floor for just 2 or 3 questions in the time we have left. And I guess Hamilton is a story of America as it was.
Yeah.
Told by artists who are America as it is. Do you have a notion of what America might be?
Wow, David. The challenge for me of that question is that I didn't get through my life without my optimism. And yet, I also have a lot of pessimism. But I want to say, let's talk about optimism for a moment. Someone said Hamilton's the best musical that's ever been made. So we keep getting better. And I think that the political events of the last year, the Black Lives Movement, the LGBTQ plus movement, the Asian American movement that we've now started, all of those movements, galvanized by young people, are going to make us a better people. And they are going to make us a better nation. And I look at our young people, and I look at the diversity of our young people. I look at my own 17-year-old son and my 18-year-old daughter. My daughter uses they. My kids are completely colorblind. And I say, there's the new world. And that fills me with optimism.
Great. Thanks.
What a pleasure. Thank you.
We have time for a couple of questions from the floor in the few minutes we have left. Yes.
Hi, I just have a quick question about development in general, because obviously you're known for works that are new. So in Australia, it's hard to get those works moving, especially in a musical format, because the structure for that doesn't exist in Australia. Do you have any recommendations of what you could do to improve that? Or is there a way that you find you step towards those things that you're like, okay, we're going to do an initial reading first, or I don't know if I'm saying it well enough, but so is there a process that you work through when you're looking at a structure to begin with, and then you lay it out like this is the format, or do you take it show by show and then develop it from there?
Well, I want to go back even a little bit further, which is that though, I can't address the specific challenges that you have here, the most important value that I have is the notion of forging relationships, artistic relationships with groups of artists, so that if you want to be a producer, your job is to hook up with the book writers, lyricists, and composers, and directors. And if you're a composer, you've got to go find your lyricist. So Lin-Manuel found Tommy Kail. Hal Prince found Stephen Sondheim, right? Andrew Lloyd Webber found Robert Stigwood, and then Cameron. So your job as young artisans is to make your own theater troupe that makes a show that can keep growing. And that's true if you are in London, and it's true if you're in New York, and it's true if you're in Sydney, Australia. Make your own theater group. Make your show, and then put one foot in front of the other.
Nice. So another question. Di, do you have one? Yeah, right.
Sure.
Hold on.
So with I guess I just want to ask your perspective on it, being in a different spot, being a producer and for a very different side of the world. With all the stuff that's happening with COVID and all that stuff that's been happening, how the climate of theatre, not just in America and England and Australia, but also universally around the world, what's kind of your perspective of kind of this new age that we might be potentially moving into in a post-COVID world, I guess?
Are you speaking about politics, or are you speaking about technology?
I guess it could affect politics, technology, but I'm saying specifically, is there do you see like a kind of a new change, a new wave in theatre in general, performance, who's like big values that people might place necessarily prior to this on what they look for in a show versus post-COVID and all that type
Yeah,
of stuff?
I think that's a great question, and it's anybody's guess.
Yeah.
I mean, no one who is alive today on Earth has ever been through anything like what all of us have now been through over the last 13 months. So how is that going to change the mindset and the hearts of authors? And the answer is we're not going to find out until we get there. And then we're also going to have to ask, how has the Black Lives Matter movement, the reignition of the civil rights movement in the US, the death of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna, how are those events going to change what the theater looks like, and what diversity looks like, and what it means to be inclusive and tell all of our stories, and not just some of our stories? And that's what we're going to find out too. And I have high hopes that we're going to see substantial change that's for the better.
Terrific. Thanks, Jeffrey. And a question? Yep.
As a producer, can you tell me when you know when it's time to close a show? When there are still people coming along, and with a show like Hamilton, you think, well, that could run forever. How do you know when it's time to close a show and then maybe bring it back to revive it again?
Excellent. Well, here's where the not-for-profit theater or the resident theater and the commercial theater really go their separate ways, which is that I have expenses every week, and when I have multiple weeks in which my ticket sales do not equal my expenses, I close. The only thing that matters once you're in commercial theater is, did you meet your expenses and exceed them? And you have to exceed or meet your expenses every week if you want to be in business. And once you start losing money, you run out of money and you close. And then you do another one. And it's that raw. We have to sell enough tickets to make our payroll.
Terrific. Jeffrey, thank you so much for being with us.
What a pleasure to be with all of you today. And I want to say thank you, the community, the state, the country, because this country did the hard work to get all of us to be able to resume our lives and to make live theater possible again. And this is the only place on earth in which anyone can go see Hamilton. And I, for one, will say that the greatest city in the world right now is Sydney, Australia.
Thank you.